Okay, how are you today?
I am wonderful, and thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you.
Good.
It's a pleasure to talk to you today and finally get a chance to meet you in person. Heard so many wonderful things about you.
Thank you.
Excited to know about your business and how you help others. Won't you tell me your name and the name of your business, a little bit about yourself?
I am Dr. Wynn, Stephvanie. It's my first name. It's spelled uniquely, so I don't allow everyone to call me by my first name. I'm called Dr. Wynn because I make winners. So, I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a coach. I am the relationship specialist. And as a woman who has found love, who's lost it to a rain of bullets, I want to make sure that I help people have that fulfilling, loving relationship, as well as help companies to provide the positive relationships for their stakeholders in order to help us have a better place to live.
That sounds wonderful. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your educational background and what sparked you or inspired you to want to help others in this space?
Well, my mother tells a story of how when I was little, I wanted to be either a doctor or a babysitter. So what I did was I became a therapist. Got my PhD, and I've specialized in children. And it was the children who brought me to the relationships, so that what I found in working with children, when I pulled in the parents and I worked with the parents, they became the source outside of the office that helped the children to really go and move forward. When I got parents to a place where they were on the same page, when they had a good positive relationship, the children tended to extremely improve, far more than just the therapy alone. For those children who had issues with their attention, for those children who had issues with depression and anxiety, it was bringing the parents together that really helped to move that forward.
So it was your work working with children that you saw a pathway to helping the adults based on the results you were getting and things you were seeing with children.
That's what took me to the relationships work. So I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've worked with adults, I've worked with children, I've worked with those who are delayed developmentally, I've worked with inmates, I've worked with just coming out of prison, so cutting back on the recidivism rate. I've done a lot of work because I used to work in community mental health. And so in community mental health, they pretty much make you take whoever comes into the office. So I was able to identify some major things, some major differences in who I was working with. And as a result, in my own life, I have 3 sets what took me to the relationship specialist. One, having been that therapist over 20 years, thousands of men and women have told me their most vulnerable secrets to understanding and connecting with the opposite sex. So I've developed, this is my man ear and this is my woman ear. As a result, it allows me to help men and women communicate better. Oftentimes they're saying the same things, except that it's not landing the way they want it to land. So that's one. 2, first of all, I grew up with the greatest men in the whole wide world. That's the truth. They are and have always been excellent role models for us, whether they had to come through some struggles and they kept going and they kept improving, they kept getting better. So that it allowed me to believe that that's what men are. Awesome, absolutely. So growing up with those great men, it bothers me tremendously when I hear women say there are no good men. Or when I have a client and I ask her to describe her dream man, and then I ask her if he exists, and oftentimes her answer is no until we've done the work that we need to do. Because sometimes it's in us that causes our relationships to not be as good as we want them to be. So that's the thing that we work on. And then 3, for me, I My original king was snatched from us from being shot. He was shot and killed, making me a single mom, making me depressed and hurt and feeling this trauma of that break, that loss. But the thing that helped me to not go further into the depths of depression and to raise our fantastic daughter was the silver lining of the outstanding relationship that we had. I always had good things to say to her whenever she asked about her biological father. And it also allows me to know that there are kings in the world. So yeah, it was a horrible situation, but it was the silver lining of the relationship that allowed me to move forward. So I want others to experience that silver lining. Then as a business owner, I see that play out in business. I see that play out in individuals. Relationships impact your intimacy, your influence, and your income. That's why I'm the specialist.
So what do you think are 3 of the most common reasons people in relationships, be it a marriage or a long-term partnership, do not make it today?
I'm going to say their difference in perception and expectation. So when you're coming together with a person, you cleave together, and I'm single or married. All the stuff in between is single. So you're single or married. That's a very different dynamic when a person is married. And I've had people argue, oh, that doesn't matter, it's a piece of paper, da 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 da. Okay, psychologically, it's a very different dynamic when you're married. So, especially for the women, that's a whole other issue. One of the things that I noticed is when they're communicating, when they're talking, if they're holding an expectation based on their past, then they're not able to accept the partner for who he or she is. So if you're not able to accept them, if you're not able to see them and understand them, then they don't feel whole. They don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. And the conflicts just continue to grow. Resentment begins to build. And once a woman loses respect for a man, it's very, very difficult to make that relationship come back. People often have said it could be money, it could be sex, it could be infidelity. All those are tremendous harms to the relationship, but they can be rebuilt, they can be reformed. The difficulty is if you're not willing to make the changes and make the differences so that your audience, for example, for a man when he's talking to his wife, if he doesn't speak to her in her language, then she doesn't understand. That's the biggest thing. So I guess the other 2 behind that, self-concept, how you feel about yourself and whether you believe that you can have a good relationship or you deserve a good relationship or you can give good relationship, and where you're going. So you need to have a pathway that you can together be on and go together in. So not in competition, but in collaboration. So I think those are the 3. Respect is powerful for a man. A woman needs to be able to respect her man so that he recognizes his kingliness. A man needs to have that honor for a woman so that he's not resenting her, so she can recognize her queenliness.
What are some of the things that can facilitate a breakdown in respect?
It's those little times when she doesn't acknowledge what he did and only points out the negatives. It's those little times when he doesn't appreciate what she did for him and only says what she didn't do. It's those little things that absolutely build up. I liken it to building a house. If you take one brick, well, you can't really live in that one brick. But brick by brick, you can build a house. Brick by brick, you build a solid foundation first. So it's those bricks that build the relationship. So one of the things that I teach is the difference between acceptance versus expectation. Acceptance builds a bond. When you accept a person for who they are and pay attention to who they are, then that really helps to build the communication and the connectedness. But when you set expectations, and those expectations are often based on past experiences, then you kind of set yourself up for losing. So the question always comes, how do you know when you're setting those losing expectations? One quick, simple way is the word should. S-H-O-U-L-D, should. So are you using that word? Should is a judgment word. Should is a word that you put on someone who's not meeting your expectation, even if you haven't shared what your expectation was. He should have done this. She should have known that. I shouldn't have to ask. That's should. So I help people often remember not to use that, not to set up that failing expectation by saying this. Don't shoulda all over yourself.
That's real profound. I'll have to remember that one for myself.
Okay. Please.
I spoke with someone a few months ago, another relationship professional. I was asking them a series of questions about something similar to what we're talking about. And I won't go into weeds about what the question was, but his answer was that, in a nutshell, we go into relationships having not assessed ourselves. We don't know ourselves. Do you believe that a lot of people, you talked about expectations earlier, do you think a lot of people either grow up or grow into what their ideal of a mate is as far as expectations are concerned without having really done an assessment of themselves and knowing who they are and what they can bring to the table? I hate that term, bring to the table, but bring it to a relationship.
Absolutely. That's absolutely the case. The difficulty is you don't know that you don't know yourself. You don't recognize that. Relationships enhance who you are, just like money enhances who you are. So when you come into a relationship, those things that you didn't realize were difficulties in yourself are highlighted in the other person, or they're noticed by the other person. So we absolutely want to do the work. I absolutely believe you do the work for yourself first. And once you do that, then that helps. Many times we simply bring in the relationship stuff from what our parents did or what we saw when we were growing up. The difficulty I always point out is, if you're doing what they did, do you want what they had? And most answers, no, I want a much better relationship. So absolutely doing the work for yourself first is paramount.
So when you talk about, in that scenario, people saying they don't want what they recognize in other relationships, particularly maybe grandparents or parents or whatever. There's a lot of talk, particularly in social media spaces, around relationships, that modern day or contemporary relationships really advocate not being in a relationship that they're not happy in. If you're not happy, then you should just leave the relationship. And I'm paralleling that with like, well, you know, my mom and my dad stayed together for 25 years, and my mom was miserable, or my dad was miserable. I don't want to be in that relationship. Others contend that they had a 25-year relationship. So when I hear that, I always think, well, do you just go through life cycling through relationships? Or are there things that can be worked out in a relationship that you say, well, I don't want X, Y, and Z in what I saw in my parents or grandparents? Can you expound on that a little bit?
Absolutely. The difficulty is the beginning of that. The premise is that they were unhappy because of the relationship. That's not why a person is unhappy. Happiness comes from inside. You have to have happiness in your life before you can even be in the relationship and expect to be happy. Now, is there times when you're with someone and you are unhappy because that person is mistreating you? That's true. That could be that. Now, in that case, how did you get married? Because the person is treating you 9 times out of 10 the same way in your marriage that they were when you were dating, if you had the opportunity to date. So one of the things about parents and grandparents, their situations were very different. You cannot, my grandmother, bless her heart, she didn't have even a bathroom in her house. So the idea of the things that you can do today in order to meet a person and get to know a person is very, very different. So the structure of where she had to come from or what she had to do is very different. Again, why I'm saying, if you saw what they had and it wasn't what you wanted, then you may not be able to copy what they did. You have to first learn yourself. Happiness is from inside. That's the problem. If you think the happiness is going to come from the relationship, then that's where you're going to falter.
In your experience in talking to couples, what do you see as the primary objective in a marriage?
Most of the time they say, oh, because we were in love. I loved him or her. Depending on who I'm talking to, that's what most of the time, that's what they tell me. We were in love. Very rarely do I meet those who are getting together and staying together because of the power couple phenomenon, because there has to be some kind of time and space and connectedness. So when you're having a hard time in your marriage and you don't like them very much in that moment, that you can still recognize that they are important. So I have heard all of those issues that you're referring to as reasons people get married. Most of that stuff is on some movie or social media or something like that. Yeah. And in real life, most people do have a connection. The difficulty is if you're not going to the same place, if your mission isn't very similar in life. That's why you have to know yourself first, because you got to know your mission. If your mission isn't very similar in life, then you often can grow apart. That's an issue. So one of the things I always suggest to dating women, I work a lot with alpha women.
So just for the audience, what is an alpha woman?
In my scenario, an alpha woman is that leader woman, that ambitious woman who goes for what she needs. She is the woman who owns the business, who runs the shop, she is that woman who balances and does and goes. But as long as she is balanced, she is an awesome mate. If she is not balanced, then we have a whole other issue because she's stepping over into his role. So I work a lot with alpha women, and as I mentioned, what alpha women are, one of the things that I find is that there is a competition. And I teach there's no competition, there's collaboration, as I mentioned earlier. What I would want to see for a couple is the recognition that you will grow and change as a person. And if the growth and change is going to separate you, then that's often what leads to the divorce, that often leads to the resentments, that often leads to the disrespect. The greatest thing is you find the person who can respect you. You find the person who is healed in themselves, and you are healed in yourselves, and you find the person who wants to make it work. If you two both want to make it work, you're going to do the work. So all the other reasons that people espouse as reasons to get married, what's really important is find the ones who want to work and who want to keep it together. Then you'll do what's necessary.
That's fair enough. For men that you talk to, and the ideal of the alpha woman, boss chick, all the other terms we're using today, is one that's near and dear to my heart. Do you find in the men that you counsel with or have even spoken to, what are their outtake on alpha women? And I don't want to go as deep as saying, well, I was in this relationship, she didn't respect me, kind of thing. But just on the surface, what do you find is the most common reactions about alpha women and women that are out there getting it, and CEO women and things like that? Are they open? I'm not sure they're open, but are they really looking for those kind of women?
It depends on the man. Because I've had men who are like, I don't want that kind of woman, I want somebody to submit to me. And I have to explain that a woman doesn't submit to a man, a woman submits to her husband. So you have to show up husbandly before you're going to get that. So especially when you're dealing with an alpha woman, she's not going to just fall off and do what you want her to do. You have to watch her character as well. So the balanced alpha woman will know how to go into the boardroom, run the board meeting, take care of business, and then come home and know that you are the king of the castle. That's the balanced alpha women. So what I get a lot is lack of balance, because they've run into men who they say are intimidated, the alpha woman, they're intimidated by them. I disagree with men are intimidated by them because they're successful as far as alpha women.
Is that their reason for not being chosen by these men?
Yes.
Each man says, and obviously I'm a man, I've heard that a lot throughout my life. Of course it's anecdotal, but most men I know are not looking for that kind of woman. And they're not intimidated by those women. They just don't want that package.
So let me just give you this. Most men I know do want that kind of woman. The difference is they want a balanced alpha woman. They don't want the one who thinks men are intimidated by her. Men are not intimidated by you because you are successful, ladies. Men who present that way may have something internal that they haven't dealt with, and that's triggering. So it's not you that's intimidating for them. Men are not intimidated by women for the most part. There's something going on internally with them that's being triggered. So as a woman though, you learn how to run the boardroom, but you don't learn how to run the bedroom. There's a different skill. But as a woman, we are detail oriented. We are multitaskers. So it's okay. We know how to do it. We can take care of the children. We cook the meals. We get the house nice. We can do multitasking. Whereas the man, he's not the multitasker. So when you get an alpha woman with the alpha man, the alpha woman who is balanced knows when to sit back and let him take the forefront. And she has had her work inside of her where she doesn't feel like she's being pushed aside or she's being put down. That's what makes the balance. So when you get that, that's how you get what you call power couples and things like that. Not because this woman is overstepping the man, or not because this man is pushing this woman to the background, but they stand together. They stand together and they come together because they have different things that benefit each other. And once they respect each other in that place, and once they love each other in that place, then no one can separate that couple. And it's not something that is popular today.